This is Radio Baladi, Friday, January 12, 2024, and I'm Ray Hanania here at WNZK AM 690 Radio. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be back here. I'm on the off season from my weekly Arab radio show, but I guest host each month, and I'm really proud to have this great guest this morning, someone I've known a long time, a journalist, a good journalist with Haaretz newspaper. Been there a long time, and he continues to still write, but he also wrote a book, Bradley Burston. Burston recently released his new book called The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era, which is a collection of columns Burston has written as one of Israel's most progressive, fair, and open-minded journalists. He's an op-ed writer, and many of his columns showcase how Netanyahu's policies over the years have led to the current conflict. Burston is the recipient of the Eliav-Sartawi Award for Mideast Journalism, which is a big deal, which was presented at the United Nations in 2006. A native of Los Angeles, he moved to Israel after graduation from Berkeley. He was a part of the group which established Kibbutz Gezer. Listen, Bradley, welcome to the program. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Ray. I'm honored to be with you.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about your background before we even get into the book, and just a little bit how your journalism background, what you're doing now, and let's go from there. How's that?
Yeah, I kind of fell into journalism. I was actually in medical school, and after a couple of years, the war in Lebanon was going on, and they drafted everybody, including me. And so basically, when I came back, I was looking for something else to do because my mind was not on my studies so much. And I fell into journalism, which, as you know, is one of the few things that you can actually fall into not knowing necessarily anything about how to do it.
All you got to do is have an opinion and know how to put a couple nouns and adverbs together and adjectives, right?
Right, and stay away from the editor when he starts throwing bricks.
That's true.
Yeah. But anyway, so and my first real job in journalism was the Gaza correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, which was at the time a fairly liberal newspaper and a joy to work for. And Gaza was there wasn't much going on there when I first got there, but then in the course of the second year that I was doing it, the Intifada broke out and Hamas was founded. And
was that you're talking about 1989, 90?
That was yeah. I mean, that was starting in December '87 and going on, and then things were fairly hot. And after that, I was the military correspondent for the paper in the Gulf War '91, and I rolled along from there.
All right. You ever regret going into journalism like most Arabs? I could have been a doctor. I don't know how I ended up being a journalist, but except the fact that I saw the way they presented us, it just didn't look fair. And instead of making millions as a good doctor, I ended up being a journalist struggling and getting attacked by people who like my opinion, don't like my opinions, and loved by those people who like my opinions. And I'm sure it's the same with you.
I would hang on to that sentiment. I have a feeling we're going to be returning to it because what you said actually kind of connects to how the different media outlets decide to cover the Gaza war. So I think we'll be circling back to that topic at some point.
So now tell us about the book, The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. Now, we're in the most contentious times of our lives. And even Arabs and Israelis, that we're so far apart. When I told somebody the title was The End of Israel, they go, oh, what is he, an Arab and he hates Jews? And I go, whoa, geez, what is it? Why do we turn to anti-Semitism as a response to something about a conflict? Can't we just discuss a conflict? Be critical of foreign governments, be critical of our own government? I don't get it. But tell us about the book. What is it about, and how can people get it? But give us an overview.
Okay, so the overview is that oddly enough, the title I came up with months before the war started. It had I had no idea that there was going to be this kind of, you know, terrible ongoing storm going on.
Yeah.
But to me, the title meant two things. One of them was that when Netanyahu continually went after and stamped out or tried to any vestige of democracy, equality, freedom, or hope, by the way, for a two-state solution. And that was, early on. This is there's the watershed period. It's 2015, 2018. That was the end of what I saw as the goal of Israel, and that's the other meaning of it. The end. That is, the end was to increase democracy, increase freedom, to increase the possibility of peace with your neighbors.
Right.
And we were moving in a direction to stamp out any of that. And so that was the original idea, because that was the period of the time when they were pursuing the judicial, what they called reform, to the exclusion of everything else, including social welfare and certainly security of all things. And so that was the original idea of the book. But the fact is that the overall theme is how the specific things that Netanyahu did over most of the last 27 years running the country actually invited and enabled Hamas to do what it did with such devastating effect.
Well, doesn't he thrive? Like Hamas is the same way. I'm no big fan of Hamas. I never have been. You and I have known each other for years. Every time we get to a point of peace, someone disruptive goes in there, uses violence. Hamas would do it. They started the suicide bombings in the mid 1990s, and then they murdered Yitzhak Rabin, who was the one guy who said he wanted to make peace. And then we end up with Sharon and the leftovers of the Irgun who are in government, and then we have Benjamin Netanyahu. How is it that Netanyahu has lasted so long in government? He's been probably the face of Israel, as you say, for almost 27 years total, correct? As prime minister.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
17 of 27 years. And well, I mean, there are a lot of answers. But one of the unfortunate answers is that he kept running out of political allies willing to go along with him, as it became obvious that he was so corrupt and so little interested, basically, in the welfare of the country. So he was left with people that he knew would go with him no matter what. And unfortunately, he found the dregs of the dregs of the dregs, the most violent, the most far right, the most uncompromising, the most Hamas-like, if you like, of allies in this terrible party. And to this day, it's a destructive force on a level that is unbelievable. This lawsuit that you keep hearing about, the claim before the International Court of Justice, the basis of that claim are these insane declarations by all of these people that Netanyahu took to his bosom, and people are saying things that they should be in jail for sure for incitement, if for nothing else.
Yeah, I mean they're no different than. They're no different than some of the Hamas leaders who have said terrible things even before October 7th. I mean, October 7th was horrible. Absolutely correct. I mean, it was terrible. There was no justification for it. And the brutality, regardless of how many or the number, because apparently that's become a debate. If you try to be precise and say, well, it was only a certain number of this, they get upset with you. We can't even deal with the facts because the emotion blankets this whole thing. How do you deal with all this stuff? When such terrible things happen and then it sparks even more terrible things, that we're seeing that are taking place in Gaza. How do you deal with that? And what do people say to you? I mean, I know what they'd say to me if I were walking around. I get it every day now. They're, you're anti-Semitic or you're anti-Israel or you're insensitive. I go, no, I'm not. I don't like both sides, both of these things. How do you deal with it, and what's happened?
So the way I and many other people have been able to deal with it, and certainly my wife as well, since December 29th, 2022, when the government came in, which was not long ago, uh, the end of December, we've been out on the streets every Saturday night, like crazy people, protesting against this government. They gave us a new reason to protest against them every single week. And I think that one of the things that I'm continually astounded by what I see when I come out, because there's enormous numbers of people, but also the issues change, but the general direction doesn't.
Okay.
People do not want Netanyahu to stick around. 56% of the country, according to a poll that was released last night, 56% of the country wants new elections, and I guarantee you, every single one of them wants an opportunity to vote against Netanyahu, because the people, the 33 to 35% that they don't want new elections in a country where when the government falls, you have a new election.
Right.
Those are exactly the people who will stick with Netanyahu until the country doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
They'll go down with the ship and they'll take it down with them.
And that's the kind of the title of your book. I think you're suggesting that you're heading in a direction that's going to bring in a terrible end. I don't see it. I mean, myself, I see, the United States is the big brother of Israel. The Arabs have done a terrible job in the United States lobbying Americans. They don't think they're important. The Arab world doesn't believe the American public's important. The Arab activists here don't believe Americans are important. But I think Americans are what sustain Israel's government to do whatever it wants to do. Bradley, we're going to take a quick break here. And then when we come back, we'll continue this discussion for the full hour. I'm Ray Hanania, everybody, and I know we got off to a little bit of a rough start, but that's okay. It's January 12th, Friday, here at WNZK AM 690, and I'm talking with Bradley Burston. He's a Eliav-Sartawi Award winner for Middle East journalism, which is a big deal. It was presented at the UN in 2006. He's a longtime columnist with Haaretz newspaper, probably one of the best newspapers. I never got to work there. I ended up working for the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post. Now, they tolerated me as long as I wrote about happy comedy stuff, but when I got into contentious areas, I could feel the pressure. But we're talking with Bradley about his new book, which is called The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. And it's a collection of columns that Burston wrote as one of Israel's most progressive, fair, and open-minded journals. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion with our guest, Bradley Burston, right after these messages. And we are back here at Radio Baladi, January 12th, 2024, Friday morning. I'm Ray Hanania here at WNZK AM 690 Radio, talking with my guest, great journalist, Bradley Burston of Haaretz newspaper and the author of a new book called The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. He's holding up the book. Who's that scary person on the front cover? That's going to chase people away. I don't know. He looks familiar. I don't know. Oh, no. So, Bradley, how do people get copies of your book also before we go back into the discussion?
Sure. So you can order from Amazon.com. You can order from Barnes & Noble online. You can order from bookshop.org, which is also a good thing to do from the standpoint of supporting independent bookstores. And eventually this will start to appear in stores. But in the meantime, that's the way you can find it.
That's great. And tell us a little bit about what people will find in the book. Give us some sense of what it is, and then we can go back to talking about some of the issues. But tell us about what they'll find inside the book when they buy it.
Okay, so the idea of the book is to give you a more detailed picture of what was going on inside Israel and all those years of things were falling apart during the Netanyahu era. And it included, for example, this campaign of divisiveness that absolutely split Israeli society into, you're either with us, in other words, you vote for
Right.
Netanyahu, or you are the enemy.
The polarization,
yeah,
just like in
yeah,
the U.S., we're polarized.
absolutely,
There's either one
absolutely.
side or the other side, no middle
That's
ground
right.
anymore.
Right. And you don't find this, there was even a cliche of, I am going to be prime minister for all the people. But at some point, he even abandoned that because it was clear that it was not going to happen. And it was never, and it didn't need to happen because he could manage with a minority of voters who were committed to vote. With a minority of voters, he could skate along for election after election after election, and he did. But the real problem was that he made a choice between his career longevity, including staying out of jail, and for corruption violations, and on the other hand, the future of the state. And the problem was that it became this zero-sum game, and now we're watching it, unfold in real time. It became this zero-sum game where he decided he's going to stay there no matter what, take responsibility for nothing, keep going, keep elections as far away as possible for as long as possible, and that'll be good enough. Because for the rest of us, we're going to have to deal with whatever he throws out, including, okay, I'm going to draft, 360,000 people. I'm not going to deal with the problems of 250,000 displaced persons inside Israel who can't go back to their homes because of the war, and I'm certainly going to keep the war going as long as possible, no matter what, because I don't want to know what happens when all those people come back from the war, mad as hell, and saying, "What did you send me for? What was the point of all this?"
And you know what, the one thing that Israel's government, and I'm always very specific, I'm talking about a government and government policies, and you'd think rational people would understand that, but they want to drag you into a debate about anti-Semitism as opposed to a debate about politics. It seems like there are a lot of Israelis who are unhappy with Netanyahu's government. Obviously, not everybody voted for him. He then reached out to the far religious right to build a coalition. I thought, and tell me if I'm wrong, to protect himself against these corruption charges that he faced that we don't hear much about anymore. He was possibly going to be convicted on corruption on 3 different charges. Then all of a sudden, all this turmoil starts up, and it sounds like a master plan to distract and protect himself by turning this war into the focus and the hate and the intensity that it's become. Have people lost sight of all that, and did he do that, or am I just mistaken about what he's done?
No, there's no question. First of all, there's no question that a big part of the judicial reform, quote unquote, had to do directly with deflecting any kind of decision in all of these 3 corruption cases. But at this point, and even though the cases actually are grinding on, and they may grind on forever in the courts, despite that, I think the real problem is that Netanyahu went to war with no exit strategy, with a level of violence in terms of the bombing campaign that we haven't seen we've never seen anything like this at all. They dropped as many bombs in the first week as America dropped in Afghanistan in a year, which is a chilling statistic. A chilling statistic on its own. That's the first thing. The second thing is there were 240 hostages. They didn't know where they were. They could have been endangering them, and in fact, they did. But the third thing, and I think probably the the crux of the matter was that he was so worried about being deposed that he, on October 7th in the evening, he set out. He says we're gonna smash Gaza. He used the word, or referred to it, revenge twice, which is something that is not the same as self-defense, certainly. And certainly, I mean, in my mind, revenge is something that never works. And said it only makes things worse. And he definitely did. And I feel that the way they went to war, and also, by the way, it's really important to point out that the Air Force had spent 11 years as a result of Goldstone and various other war crime allegations. The Air Force had spent 11 years trying to reduce the number of civilian casualties, but there was no question that they made it that Netanyahu and Gallant and the others at the top of the pyramid said, no, we want something else this time. And what the IDF spokesman said in another chilling statement, which was already on October 10th, was the emphasis is more on damage than it is on accuracy.
Right.
Which is absolutely starts to rip your skin off in terms of how horrible this is and what happened as a result.
Yeah, I think that a smart policy had Israel had a good government. And again, I'm not criticizing Israel as a country. I'm criticizing their government is horrible. They have a terrorist in my mind as the leader of the country, who's no different than the terrorists in Hamas. He could have gone into Gaza. They have such sophisticated technology and a network of information. They could have identified who the terrorists actually were. They could have taken them out. They could have taken out those Hamas leaders. They could have done all that, but it just seemed like this was an opportunity to do more than just take out Hamas. They want to just sweep out everything out of Gaza. They've just destroyed, like, I think 80% or 70% of all the buildings and all the homes. And, it's hard to talk about this without, acknowledging that, the Israelis, what Hamas did to Israelis was horrible. I mean, the massacres, there's no even debate about whether it's 1 or 10, even if it's one baby or 10 babies or women being raped, 1 or 10, it doesn't really matter. What they did was horrible, and they had no right to do that. And I blame the Palestinian leadership, which is feeble. I mean, we're in a time, aren't we, where we have the president of the United States he's incapable of making a strong decision. He's like, I'm worried about our future, and I'm worried about Israel's future. There's a government in Israel that is more interested, in revenge rather than peace. They don't care about peace, and the Palestinian leadership can't take control of their own people to stop a terrorist group like Hamas. This is like the worst scenario for anything, and it's just going to get worse.
I mean, there's no question that the curse of the Palestinian people and the curse of the Israeli people, the curse is the quality of the people who lead them.
Yeah,
it's awful.
it's
and
terrible.
they're so busy telling you that they're so different, these leaders. I want to return for the moment to these protests, because the protests in Tel Aviv take place across the street from on Saturday night. Now there's protests of the families of the hostages, trying to get the government to have a ceasefire, make a deal, and bring these hostages home. There's 136 left. Hopefully, many of them, if not all of them, are still alive, but they are all in dire straits. We know that.
Right.
And so when you go to the demonstration of the families undergoing hell because their loved ones are in Gaza being held underground and hostage, and this is coming up on 100 days that they've been held. What is amazing is that these protests are held across the street from where Netanyahu is down in his bunker addressing the nation every Saturday night. and
Yikes.
they make sure they bring him in by a side entrance. It's the defense ministry. When they bring him in, he never has to hear or see the people who are in
They
pain
isolate
crying
him.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they isolate him. Bradley, we're going to take another break here. We got two more we're going to do. My guest on the line with me, and we're broadcasting live. You can go to U.S. Arab Radio on Facebook, and afterwards we'll have this posted on YouTube. My guest is Bradley Burston, a longtime columnist, award-winning columnist, great guy. And I'll tell you, if everybody were like Bradley Burston, we would have peace in the Middle East, Bradley. And I wish there were people on the Palestinian side. I wish they'd get their head out of their asses and figure out how to lead the Palestinian people instead of just sitting there and laid back doing nothing, allowing crazies like Hamas to do what they've done. Everything's gone wrong. But Bradley, if you read his new book, The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era, you can read his columns about how there is a way to get to peace, because when you see the direction everything is headed, you immediately realize it's wrong and there is a better way to do it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue talking with Bradley Burston, our columnist friend who is based in Israel right now. I'm Ray Hanania in Chicago. We'll be right back right after these messages. All right, and welcome back to Radio Baladi. This is Ray Hanania. It's Friday, January 12, 2024 on WNZK AM 690 Radio, live in Detroit. I would ask people to call in, but because we're having just a little technical difficulty hearing the studio, I'm not going to know. I don't think I can actually put any of the listeners on the air. So, Bradley, you actually get more time to talk about your book. So, tell us some of the books. You have some famous people in your book, don't you?
Well, you're in there to begin
Oh,
with.
oh my God, I didn't know that. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, I mean, you took a bunch of columns. You did a column about it, something that I had tried to do many years ago about pushing a peace plan, which I thought, okay, this is the best. I thought this is the best way to do things. And you wrote a nice column about it, which I thought was phenomenal. And but there's so much else inside the book too. I mean, do you think people are going to understand the challenges that this conflict presents by reading some of these essays that you've written in columns?
Well, I think in some ways they will. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that some of the trends that the book talks about will change, only because uh, this the result of the far right taking over the government
Yeah.
was so disastrous and so completely catastrophic that people are starting to think about other alternatives. They're only beginning to. It's going to take forever for us to heal on both sides of the border.
Right.
The pain, the unbelievable anger, the trauma that people have gone through. And there's one thing I want to point out, which is I think is really important, and it's something that these columns didn't deal with, but I think it's something we're all dealing with now. Is that uh, one of the things that makes Sinwar and Netanyahu so similar as they sit there
Right.
down in their respective bunkers is that they went after people's homes.
Right.
They went after the place where people
Right.
feel safe,
Yes.
where the family is, where the family feels the heart is.
Right.
I mean, it's a cliche, but it's also true.
Hamas didn't target a military base.
No,
They targeted a music festival with civilians and probably good people who supported Palestinian rights when you think about it.
They did. They went after exactly. If you wanted to take a segment of Israeli society that was in favor of Palestinian independence and human rights in general, and equality and democracy and freedom for as many people as possible. This was exactly the segment of population. And then there's the idea of destroying people's homes. I mean, we think about terrorism in terms of and of course there's slaughter in terrorism, and it's just awful, and the wounds that won't heal. But the fact of displacing people for Jews and Arabs, there is nothing like the trigger word of expulsion, obviously,
right.
and that's one of the themes that was not one of the major themes of the book, but in this war, looking back, it's become an enormous theme. People don't feel safe in their homes. Their homes may have been destroyed by the other side already, and that to me is a form of terrorism which is so profound that people do not get over it. And what I'm worried about is that it's going to take generations before people can come back and say, okay, I'm going to look at you on the other side and see you as a human being, which they have to do. Otherwise, there'll never be peace.
This is going to be worse for a long time. Are you shocked at maybe not shocked, but are you surprised at the level that, in Israel and in the United States, where people have turned away from facts, and they're just like in a angry defensive revenge mode? I think people are like, this is about revenge. People want anger. So they get upset because women and children are killed, and they should be upset. And then they see women and children being killed, and they say, no, that's not happening, or that's not our fault. It's happening. It's some Hamas terrorist that's hiding behind them. And I'm thinking, when did we lose the humanity that made us such good people? It just doesn't seem to be there. Or are the people with humanity just afraid to stand up and speak up? Or have we lost rank? Have our numbers dwindled? What is going on? I mean, you see the evil on both sides, and they're getting away with it. And it's terrible.
I think people find it really threatening when they have to really look, open their eyes at what their own side has done in the context of this conflict.
Right.
It doesn't say
Palestinians need to see the horror of what Hamas did and the Israelis need to see the horror of what Netanyahu did. But they're looking past their own at the other side and fueling their anger, right?
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately we journalists are a big part of aiding and abetting that. I think that what happens is, and you can see it on both sides, in Israel it's pretty obvious, we curate very carefully the news that comes in. So we feed people's prejudices. We feed their anger.
They're not presenting facts. They're just feeding the hate. Because you're right. When you don't see in the media here in the United States the devastation that's taking place in Gaza. What you do see only literally on TV are Anthony Blinken and Biden, and then the far right, the Republican right, talking about how a ceasefire is bad, or this is an issue of anti-Semitism. There's a big debate about these important issues, but they're around the side. They're not the focus issues. So Americans are not seeing that. The only place they see it is on social media, on TikTok. And I compare
which is also curated and can be.
Yes, it is. It is, but not as much as Facebook or Twitter. So it's hard. It's like they want to stop the information so that they can keep going ahead with this bulldozer to destroy everything. You're Israeli. I mean, are you worried about your future? First of all, from the sense of you're a moderate. Moderates seem to be the most hated people in Israel and the United States these days.
It's not easy, and actually, and I'm a person who believes that if there's any way forward, if there's any future for this country, the future of this country is Arab-Jewish cooperation.
Yeah.
And there were starting especially during the COVID era, there was a whole current, a whole momentum of looking at Arab citizens of Israel totally differently. The Jews until then had thought of very often of Palestinian citizens of Israel as being this fifth column that was going to
Right.
invade them basically, and then during the COVID period, people realized that the medical the medical system in this country, the medical establishment, was absolutely dependent on this self-sacrifice of this exact segment of the population, 1 out of 5 Israelis. Oddly enough, there were polls taken during the war that suggested that Palestinian citizens of Israel feel more Israeli than they have before. They don't like this bombing, and they're not allowed really to talk about it because
Right.
you can be prosecuted for it.
Right.
But
there's no free speech, is there, in Israel?
Well, there is some, but for Arabs, there basically is not. And that's the problem with democracy in general. It's democracy for some people. And by the way, a lot of the moderates also don't have democracy either for the same reason. On the other hand, there's still this very, very strong current of people in certain organizations getting together and trying their best, Arabs and Jews together, to do all kinds of activism, including to try to found political parties or to increase Arab representation in leftist parties. There's a number of there's evidence. There's reason to believe now that there will be new parties in the next election, and at least one of them will be a party of the left with a substantial Arab component, which would be great, and which would change this place a great deal. And then there are several organizations where Arabs and Jews work together, especially an organization called Standing Together, but there are a bunch of others that are moving forward. The government is doing everything it can to keep these groups from assembling, from demonstrating against the war, from having just free assembly. But it's happening anyway, and these are really, really important groups. There's combatants for peace, people who were on both sides and who were under arms and now are working for peace. There's the bereaved parents circle, Arabs and Jews, families who've lost loved ones to the conflict and want to work for peace. There's Women Wage Peace. There's one after another these organizations. So I am hopeful that even though everything is mitigating against this, we're going to move forward. It's just going to be unbearably slow.
I think part of the problem is there is no real leadership pushing for peace. All we get is leadership pushing for hate, anger, and despair. There's no leadership in the Arab world really pushing for peace. There's no leadership in the U.S. I know there's a big debate in the U.S. about, a ceasefire is bad. And I'm going, wait a minute, a ceasefire is bad? How is a ceasefire bad? So everything's been politicized into what it means. And there's anger, there's hatred. This is the worst time I have ever seen things in all the years that I've been involved between Israelis and Palestinians. This is the worst time in our own communities. And I'm sure it's the same way with you. Bradley, we got to take our last break. And I apologize. One thing, you got to fund the radio show. And thanks to our, I don't want to call her producer. She's the spirit of Radio Baladi and U.S. Arab Radio, Layla El Husseini. She does a great job. She's been struggling and fighting. You don't get much Arab news, information in the U.S. They censor us, they block us, they prevent us from doing things. And when they can't stop us, then they call us names, so it's like a struggle. So she continues to do it. She does a great job. So listen, let's take our last break. When we come back, we'll continue talking with Bradley Burston here at WNZK AM 690 Radio. We'll be right back right after these messages. All right, and welcome back to Radio Baladi. It's Ray Hanania here with my guest Bradley Burston, the author of a new book that just came out, The End of Israel: Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. It actually offers you perspectives that he's written over the years at Haaretz newspaper, probably one of the most important publications. If you really want to understand what's really happening in Israel, that's the paper that you got to connect with. And you got to stay in touch with Bradley Burston and his writing because he really puts it in perspective. Bradley, we were talking about before the break about, there was this lack of awareness of what was happening among Palestinians in Israel, correct?
Right.
Did they not get the details? What was going on?
So no one really knew what Palestinians were being exposed to in the West Bank and Gaza, anyway, what they were being exposed to in terms of the news, what they knew and what they didn't.
Right.
And so a pollster, a Palestinian pollster who is eminent and excellent, uh, polled Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza during the lull. There was about a week at the end of October, beginning of November, when there were prisoner and hostage exchanges, and during that lull, they asked the people in Gaza and the West Bank, "Are Hamas war criminals?" And people said no. Overwhelmingly, no. They're not war criminals. And then they asked them after that question. They asked them, um, "What do you know about what happened on October 7th? And what have you heard about that?" And it became clear that they knew nothing of what the Hamas people had done on October 7th. They knew from Al Jazeera and elsewhere everything about the horrendous bombings
Right.
and the destruction in Gaza. They had no idea of the human toll that the Hamas exacted on October 7th.
Isn't that part of the problem? I mean, even the Arab media doesn't really talk about the extent of what Hamas did to the Israelis, the way they talk about to the extent of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And I'm not saying either is justified in any manner, but it seems like both sides, the Israeli media plays down what it does to Palestinians. You couldn't I mean, they do have a censorship, don't they, in Israel? If you write something that the Israeli military disagrees with, could you be in trouble?
You don't need censorship. In point of fact,
They just
uh,
do it because they know that there's a line and they don't want to cross it.
I I hesitate to use this term, but it's the term that I use in my head, which is you're selling a product
Right.
and you know what sells. By the way, this is true on both sides of the border. This is
Right.
true
I
on both
get it.
sides of every border.
Yes.
You know what sells. And in this era, you bet if you sell a product which is, well, this is happening, but also this is happening, people's eyes glaze over and they move into the more comfortable. I mean, it's going to be the world's worst comfort zone, but it's their comfort zone where they hear horrendous things about the other side and
Right.
they believe everything good about their own.
So there's a unrestrained reporting that's critical of the other people, but you're restrained, sometimes self-restrained, but you could get in trouble. I mean, and this isn't just in Israel. This is in a lot of Arab countries too. It's the same
That's
way.
true.
You
That's
can't
true.
just write whatever you want to write about what's happening.
I think but it's also true that there are media outlets. If you want to find out what's going on, at least in Israel, there are media outlets which tell you. And
Right.
in particular, television is no good anymore. But if you read Haaretz, if you read Plus 972 magazine online,
Right.
and its Hebrew version also, it's called Sicha Mekomit. Then you get a much more complete picture of what's going on both sides.
All right. And Bradley, you don't have a website yet, but if people can go to Amazon.com, they could go to a couple different places to find your book. It's out there. The book is titled The End of Israel: Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. There's a copy of it on the screen there. I urge you to get the book. It's not about the title. You know, some people are going to say, oh, this is anti-Israeli. No, it's not anti-Israeli. It's about talking about what could happen in a bad way if things don't change. I get it. I think good people in the middle get it, like you, Bradley. You know, we need to do something better to really build up the center and the moderation. And it's like it's dissipating.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is this word that got it for some reason it went out of use altogether because people kind of disdain it. The answer is humanism. I mean, the
Right.
answer is seeing people as human beings. That's all it is, and that's hard enough.
And if people would just stop playing politics every time you talk about a tragedy,
Yeah, that's
talk
right.
about a tragedy in a human aspect, right? Just show some empathy rather than turning it into a bludgeon so that you could do the same thing to somebody else without consequences. What's happening there is horrible, and I just feel terrible. But I worry about, you know, the moderation and the peace movement. Is there a peace movement in Israel still?
I think that there's, I think that there's a budding peace movement. I think the peace movement that we knew uh, was snuffed out, uh, and long before
Right.
October 7th.
Yeah.
But it was tremendously tragic that many of the Israeli victims of Hamas were exactly the kind of people who wanted full freedoms for Palestinians. It's just and I think that the right wing here took a certain amount of um, satisfaction in
Yeah.
the fact, which is a terrible thing.
I,
There's a
I
certain amount of
always
satisfaction in that fact.
I always think that the extremists want the violence because the
Oh yeah,
violence gives them an opportunity to do whatever they want to do to achieve their goal, which is eliminating the other side. And we have extremists on both sides, and it's always been that way. And it just seems like, Bradley, it's just getting worse and worse. It doesn't seem like it's getting better, and that's the thing that's so disturbing. And that's why I think your book, the title, captures the direction that everybody is headed, because it's not just the end of Israel, it's the end of Palestine. You know, and they could probably write the same title in the same book for Palestine. And I think Palestinians too, they need to get out of their anger, as difficult as it is, and realize that it's not anger that's going to stop the carnage. It's going to be a movement of peace. So, anyway, final thoughts. You got a minute, Brad.
okay, so I want to leave you with this kind of word of warning. Years ago, the finance minister Bezalel Smotrich made himself famous by
Yeah.
saying that he wanted to have maternity wards segregated in Israel because he said, "Why you want? Why would my wife want to lie next to a woman who's going to give birth to someone who in 20 years
It's
is
just
going to be a terrorist?" Right?
horrible people.
And that to me is the model for what's wrong about all of this stuff. And thinking that these are religious people on both sides who are leading work which is if anything is the devil's work, this is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. There have been. We could have spent a whole hour just talking about some of the crazy people on both sides. And again, there's a little difference. The Israelis are a powerful, organized government. The Palestinians are a fractioned, dysfunctional presence. So it's unfair. But anyway, listen, I'd love to continue this discussion with you in the future, Bradley. You're a great guy. My guest, Bradley Burston, here at WNZK AM 690. Again, his book, The End of Israel, Dispatches from a Path to Catastrophe in a Challenging Era. It's a collection of some of his best columns. You want to read it if you want to understand the direction that Israel is headed in and the Palestinians are headed in. His book and his columns are the way to go. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us. We really so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, we will talk to you again next month when I'm back as a guest host in February. So you guys have a great winter, snuggle up, protect yourself from the snow, and we will talk to you again. Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.